Listen, Call of Duty recently came out with a white paper all about the role of skill in matchmaking. Right now, this is multiplayer only at this point. We don't have anything from them on Warzone, but the data in this white paper showed that every skill level other than the highest bucket of skill enjoys Call of Duty when more skill is factored into matchmaking as opposed to less. And it isn't like, and here's what they did. Earlier this year, they took half the player base, half the Call of Duty player base. This is, multiplayer, not Warzone. They took half the player base and they toned down the skill portion of the matchmaking. They toned that down. So they removed skill as much of a, as big of an influence in the matchmaking as it normally is. And they immediately started to see, not the whole player base didn't leave, but the significant portions did, significant enough where they only wanted to run the test for 2 weeks. Okay, so they ran it for a couple weeks and saw this and were like, oh crap. So they put it back to the way it was. And every skill bucket except for the highest skill bucket suffered when they turned down the SBMM. They also did an inverse test where they turned the SBMM up for half the player base. So then the high skill players were like, well, this sucks. That bucket started to leave. But AKA not play as much. So they have basically used that white paper and the data in that white paper to justify, where the skill-based part of the matchmaking is for them right now. And a lot of people, mostly in the high skill player group, but a lot of it's on, Call of Duty Twitter or X is there's a lot of higher skill players in there, but there's also a lot of streamers and content creators, and there's a lot of their fans are all following them on Call of Duty Twitter and things like that. And many of them also say they hate skill-based matchmaking, although according to the data that we got from Call of Duty, statistically speaking, if any of them are average or below skill players, they should actually not be against skill-based matchmaking. So what gives? That's the question, right? In my opinion, it is kind of trendy to get on that bandwagon and say SBMM sucks. Because all the streamers, all the high skill players, they're all saying that. All of them. None of those guys would ever think about saying, because they're in that high skill bucket. Right? But if you're not, the data shows that you should probably enjoy skill-based matchmaking being in the game. Okay? I'm going to explain what skill-based matchmaking is supposed to do.
And here we go.
There is a skill component of Call of Duty's matchmaking system. And this is all from I've read these white papers 3 times each. If skill-based matchmaking does what it's supposed to do, you're not supposed to be getting people in your lobbies that shouldn't be there. But if skill-based matchmaking is working the way it's supposed to, and if you're for skill-based matchmaking in games, it should keep those super higher skill, those 2, 3, 4 times better players out of your lobbies. That's what it should do. It should be doing that. It should also be keeping you away from the 0.01 KD players, like the very bottom of the brand new players. You shouldn't see those either, probably, unless you're one of those, which is fine. Like, for example, if you're a Solos player, Solos doesn't have super strict SBMM. It doesn't, because there's not enough players. So if you're running into super high skill players in Solos and getting wiped out or whatever, that's because there isn't as much skill-based matchmaking. So you could say, well, I would like stricter skill-based matchmaking. That should tighten that in. Let's see, you're in the middle. That should tighten the lobbies in toward you. That's what it's supposed to do. Unless you're Holy Shepherd, or Polish Moon, or Twitty, or any of the other super high skill solo streamers out there that aren't in lobbies where they generally get decimated, because they're top of the food chain. Which is why those guys don't like SBMM. I hope for anybody that wasn't quite clear on how that works and why things are the way they are, I hope it's kind of clicking now. Like, oh, that's why high skill players don't like SBMM. Right. That's why they don't like it, because because the SBMM keeps them away from the players they can decimate and roll over. Right. They the higher skills players oftentimes think, not everybody, but a lot of them do think that their lobbies are relatively harder for them than yours are for you or mine are for me or whatever. People have their own personal biases, right? My life is harder than yours. My job is harder than yours. That's how human nature is. Like, we take what's happening to us, and that's the focus for us. Like how for thousands of years, we were the center of everything. Like, it was just Earth. That's it. And then as soon as we started seeing stars in the sky and the sun and everything else, we were like, oh, they all revolve around us. Yeah, no, right? We eventually figured out that's not true. But that's human nature, that everything should revolve around us. I mean, that's self-preservation. Like, that's part of our humanity. It's in our DNA. So, but it's not true, right? It's, in my opinion, a 3KD player's lobbies are no harder for them than mine are for me. The reason I say that is because, yeah, obviously the skill-based matchmaking, but they say, well, there's a lot more lower skill players in your lobby. Well, yeah, but they're only much lower skill compared to you, not compared to me, right? And so if a 3KD player in his lobbies, he's in probably let's say a 1.2, 1.4, 1.5 KD lobby, right, on average. The average KD of the players in his lobby are half as skilled as he is. I mean, just strictly by numbers. Let's go by numbers, right? Because that's all we got, right? In my lobby, as let's call me a 0.85 or 0.8 KD player, whatever. I don't even know what it is. It's higher than it used to be. I am going up slowly but surely. In my lobbies, if I'm in a similar lobby, a 0.8 KD lobby, something that 3 KD player would love to be in, if I'm in a 0.8 KD lobby, I'm at the average. I'm where all the other players are. There's going to be players way better than me and some below me, but I'm right there. They think their lobbies feel a lot harder because of just how the gameplay is, right? They think they've got to be, constantly sweating, but that's at their level. At my level, I'm constantly sweating. You know what I mean? Everything's relative. They look at what we do in our lobbies and they say, well, that was really dumb. Well, we look at that and we go, well, yeah, I realized it was dumb after I did it. But when I was doing it, I just didn't think about that, or I made a mistake or whatever. They don't make the mistakes. They can't, they don't make those mistakes at their level because they're higher skilled. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I mean, their lobbies are harder, but they're also way better. So, yeah, it's not an argument that holds any water with me, just because to me, it doesn't make any sense. Warzone 1 had the same kind of matchmaking as what we have now. There's differences because the player base in Warzone 1 was massive compared to what it is now. Like there's MAUs and DAUs. I don't know if you guys don't know that. I'll explain it really, really quick. I want to keep moving here, but I'll explain it really quick. Activision tracks MAUs and DAUs. MAUs include a lot larger percentage of the player base, a lot more casual players. It's a much bigger number than DAUs. MAUs are monthly active users, so people that play Call of Duty games in the space of a month, on average. And DAUs are daily active users, so people that play Call of Duty on a daily basis, okay? The DAUs is typically a much smaller number, and is going to be much more hardcore players, things like that. Because MAUs, there's a sizable portion of the player base that isn't going to be included in some of those numbers because they play once a week, a couple times a month, whatever. Once a month, maybe, depends. Casual players sometimes don't play Warzone or Call of Duty, more than once a month. Just depends on what they got going on. And back in early Warzone times, their MAUs reached over 150 million. Way up there. Okay. Now they're maybe a fifth of that or something. So not even half, I don't think. So things are way different now in the player base. and the DAUs and the MAUs are way sweatier on average than they were back then, just by numbers, just by the numbers. Like, they would have to be sweatier, and you know, it's normal. Player bases change over time with games that have been out for a long time and things like that. So, but you know, when the lobbies look the way Call of Duty wants them to look, like when they looked the way they wanted them to look back in Verdansk, and when playtime was higher, no matter what, they might have done a lot of different things with the matchmaking, and maybe you had less of it in your lobbies. Maybe you had a lot more lower skill players in your lobbies, like, than you do now, and that makes sense to me because there were more of them, right? So yeah, I miss those lobbies too, and I'm not a high skill player. Even I miss those lobbies. So yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's kind of the way it is, I think. But think about it this way: if what they were doing wasn't working for them, if it was driving too many players away, they would have changed it long ago. Because they want to make money, and players aren't playing, they can't make any money. So if what they're doing isn't working, they would have changed it. So what they're doing must be working. Bottom line.